Howdy. Thanks for listening to Let the Movie Speak. Before we get started, we'd like to ask a favor of you.
It's a simple favor. If you could just rate and review our show on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever else you listen, that might help other ears get into our ecosystem here and hear another episode. Anyway, enjoy the show.
It's 1931. The Empire State Building opens in New York City. Al Capone is indicted on 5,000 counts of prohibition and perjury. And Fritz Lang, already an established German director, coming off the heels of his sci-fi epic Metropolis, releases M.
Let the movie speak.
Well, welcome everybody to Let the Movie Speak. I'm Travis.
And I'm Justin.
Just a couple of guys who fancy ourselves film fans, certainly not professional critics, but we love to discuss and see what we can find in the movies we watch. So we decided to put the show together in order to see some movies we haven't seen and hopefully have some conversations we haven't had and get you guys involved as listeners. And we're excited this week to bring you Fritz Lang's 1931 feature M.
Indeed we are. I'm sorry, I have no...
Obviously, we're professionals, so
Yep.
This is going to go perfectly. All that to say, we hope you enjoyed the conversation. We're going to start by just giving you a little bit every week of what we watch on a regular basis or from week to week. And I think you'll find it's kind of eclectic and
Yes.
varying, wouldn't you say, Justin?
Yeah, I would agree. I mean, are we, and I'm screwing it up again because, as you mentioned, professionalism. Is this the portion now where we're discussing with our wonderful audience what we've watched
Exactly.
recently? Okay, fantastic. I'm just waking up over here. I'm on Hong Kong time.
Perfect segue. What did you watch this week?
Yeah, thank you. So I am still watching the latest season and episodes of The Mandalorian as they're being released. It's no secret to you, as we're both Star Wars avid fans. Although I'm starting to question your allegiances, as we've noted that you have not seen any of the latest season.
Yeah.
Which is concerning to your brother in the ways of the Force. But nevertheless, I travel on by myself, albeit.
You find my lack of faith disturbing. I understand.
I think you will be pleased by some things in this new season, as I am, and I don't know how much I should mention or shouldn't mention, given that.
I'm pretty sure I'm the only one who might be involved or listening who hasn't seen the latest episode of The Mandalorian.
Okay.
So, what about
Okay.
what highlights? What so far?
Highlights.
Yeah.
Well, Tamura Morrison comes back as Boba Fett, which is a big deal.
It is a big deal.
He brings some real gravitas to the role. He's just a very... I don't know if you've seen him in anything outside of Star Wars films, but he's a very imposing character when he's directed to be so. And this episode is actually directed by Robert Rodriguez.
Oh, geez, that's interesting.
It is interesting because it's in the most family-friendly way possible. It's very violent, which is not surprising for Mr. Rodriguez. And it's fitting with the story they're telling, and I get that probably sounds rather oxymoronic, but there is a point there. So I don't want to get too bogged down in that because it's not what our show is about. But suffice to say, some of the very best things about Star Wars are in this show, in my opinion.
That's what I've been hearing. Yeah.
And some of the very worst tendencies of Star Wars.
Nice.
So
Wouldn't be Star Wars without a little of both.
Right. And so it's unfortunate that, and in my opinion at least, that some of those less savory aspects are in there, especially as it relates to the usage of CGI.
Our favorite CGI.
Yes, our old ally, our old friend, CGI.
A lot of CGI in M, too, so we're going to have to get into that.
Yeah, I mean, the first UFO, I thought, okay, one is enough, but Fritz,
Yeah,
all
Fritz.
about the UFOs. So, what about you? What have you been watching?
So I did a little rewatch of the Daniel Craig Bond films, the last four,
Okay,
because
okay,
I was reasonably excited to hear that Cary Fukunaga was doing the newest one.
yeah,
So yeah, I watched Casino Royale. This is over probably the course of like 2.5 weeks. I don't want anyone to think that like I'm some like lard butt with no life who just sits and
Well, Lord
watches.
Lord Bucket, I think, is what
Lo-
I've heard people say.
Yeah, about me. Yeah, I'm a lard bucket. And so Casino Royale, Quantum of Solace, Spectre, which I hadn't seen. I think I
Okay,
skipped it because I was a little burnt back when it came out, and then rewatched Skyfall. And
okay.
in general, I don't know. I've seen a lot of Bond films, and I think you have too.
Yes. Come now,
Yes,
Mr.
exactly.
Kerr. You enjoy Mr. Bond just as much as I do.
Yes. I say in general, these hold up a lot better consistently than some of the older ones, especially I would say the Brosnan and 80s guy. Who's the 80s guy?
Timothy Dalton.
Timothy Dalton era. Where they really leaned into the ridiculousness. Obviously, you get sort of the opposite effect, right? You got the post 9/11 film industry, so
Chaos
it's
cinema kind
yeah,
of feel. Yeah.
the Bourne cinema.
Yes. James
Um,
Bond as the gritty, dark, conflicted, tormented action
yeah.
hero.
That really Casino Royale really sets the tone for that.
Yes.
But I think by the time you get to Skyfall, it's and I'm sorry, the order's wrong. Skyfall and then Spectre. That's the way
Right.
it goes. Because
Right.
I've heard people argue that like every other Bond film is good, and in this case, that's pretty correct, right? Like Casino Royale is very tight, very good, and it doesn't lean heavily on set pieces. It's really about characters, which I enjoy. Quantum of Solace is the opposite. It's almost all set pieces, and the story barely makes any sense. And then Skyfall's great because they really do Judi Dench a service, and her
Yes.
character. They go a direction there that just I think it's probably my favorite Bond film because they make it about a Bond girl in a way that isn't conventional. Like she's the ultimate Bond girl because
Yeah.
she's the woman that he is more attached to than any of those passing relationships or whatever, and they just really go to an interesting place there. And then Spectre is honestly like Quantum of Solace too. It's a lot of spectacle, and the plot is sort of meandering, and it's got some good set pieces and sequences, which is what's kind of expected and wanted. But yeah, it's kind of hit and miss that whole.
Well, the whole franchise has been, right?
Yeah.
From the get-go. It can never... It doesn't last very long on one tone or one kind of producer's vision,
Right.
even though Mr. Broccoli is involved in so much of that.
Yeah.
It can't decide if it wants to go the kind of Pierce Brosnan route and just, I don't know if you remember his last outing as Bond, Die Another Day, where there's like a giant satellite at the end shooting a space
Yes.
laser at his Aston Martin as it's driving on like the ice
On the
in
ice, yeah.
Antarctica or
So
something.
good.
It's just,
Oh my
it's
gosh.
insane.
It's ridiculous.
It's so unrelatable. I mean, it might as well be Star Wars.
Yeah.
It's just
And the villain has diamonds like blown into his face with a grenade, if
Right.
I'm not mistaken, like in the first scene.
yes, exactly. So, I would say that is kind of endemic to that series. Is the inability to really decide. Does James and now like with this the latest movie that we're waiting for, No Time to Die.
Yeah.
There's renewed conversation about some people feeling conflicted about kind of classical James Bond values, at least the
Right.
values of that character. And I mean they're never good values, so I don't know that womanizing and being an alcoholic have ever been a good thing.
I know
But,
that they haven't, but that's cool.
Oh, okay, fair enough. Well, we can, have a different opinion on that. But yeah, it's interesting that there's not, you can't backtrack from that. You can't
Sure.
have a character. It's like the longest running franchise in film history, right? So you can't just do a 180 all of a sudden.
Certainly.
And so it'll be interesting to see, I think, where No Time to Die, as his last film outing as Bond supposedly, lands on that tone. I will say, based on the trailers, it looks like Spectre 3 or Quantum of Solace 3 to me. Unfortunately, I'd love for it to be something more, but
Yeah, it may just be trailers though. Like we say this a lot, right? Like trailers nowadays are so incredibly deceiving and also revealing and deceiving, both
Right.
in the worst ways. So they can show you things you didn't want to see that maybe don't characterize the movie, and they can show you things you didn't want to see that absolutely do. And it's kind of hard to parse out the difference. But I just remembered a line from Die Another Day that
Send
made me
it.
really happy. I think somebody looks at the villain with the diamonds in his face and they say, your friend has really expensive acne, or something ridiculous like that. That's
Yep.
about right for Pierce Brosnan's Bond. All right.
That's about right.
So that's what I watched this week. That's what you watched this week. Shall we get into M? How does that
Shall
sound?
we? It sounds great.
Let's do it. All right, so M, 1931, Fritz
Yes.
Lang. Let's just give some brief history about the film. We're not historians by any means, but I like to know the context about what brought a film about, as well as I want to know how many times have you seen M? This was my first time seeing
My
M.
second time.
Okay. Yeah, I think you were the one who lobbied to have this one on the list.
I was indeed guilty as charged. It's not to put the cart before the horse, but this is a very powerful movie that I think in many ways is either ahead of its time or timeless or both. And so I thought it really deserved our attention. And even though it is considered by AFI or whatever these kind of movie brain trusts
Yes.
a classic, I've found that generally when I speak with movies about other people except for yourself, nobody's really heard of it. So I think anything to draw more attention and awareness to that, not that our sphere of influence is all that big, but anything
it's huge. As big as that laser from Die Another Day.
I think the Queen is listening right now.
Yeah, of course she is.
And I think it deserves attention and preservation and all the good things that go along with good art in general.
Yeah. This is one of those movies you mentioned AFI. I've always seen it. I remember I had this almost like a coffee table book when I was a teenager. 100 movies you need to see before you die, or maybe it was 1,000. It's this big fat tome of a book with pictures.
Yeah. Oh, is that Malton? Is that a Leonard Malton?
I don't know.
Thing? Okay.
Someone gave it to me for Christmas because they knew I liked movies, and I had a little checklist at the beginning, so I would check them off as I went, and as a 15-year-old, I'd already seen way too many of them, but M was in there, and I remember flipping to that page, and I've seen it on other lists, on the internet, 100 greatest films ever made, or whatever, and there's that image of Peter Lorre looking in the reflection of the glass at the M on his shoulder with those big eyes, and I always was like, holy cow, that just looks striking. The
Right.
name so abbreviated, that image with the letter on his shoulder. I was always one of those movies that I was like, I got to see that. But it's not, on Netflix as far as I know. And in fact, I know because I checked. But you're right. It's well regarded by, egg-headed people and film critics alike and whatever.
Yeah.
But I think the average person is like, I don't know what that is. So I was happy to give it a whirl. Historically, right, I found a couple of things that were of interest. So this is 1931. I think we mentioned in the intro, the Nazi Party is on the move, on the rise, but not quite in full control.
Yeah.
This is Fritz Lang's first speaking film, so he hadn't ever done dialogue before, or directed dialogue before, rather. But he just came off the heels of this huge worldwide success, kind of, sci-fi epic, Metropolis, 1927. And there's some interesting kind of background, Germany-wise. He despised the Nazi Party, allegedly, and was vehemently against everything they stood for. But his wife would go on to become a Nazi. And I think just the fact that it's his first speaking film and one of the first speaking films is significant.
Yeah, especially as it relates to sound design, I would say.
Yeah.
And we can probably, maybe it's not quite yet, but I would love to have a point here in which we could discuss how how that era kind of lends itself to some interesting sound design choices, but how they are all kind of perfect choices in my
Yeah.
mind.
Yeah. Yeah.
Sometimes no sound is absolutely the correct thing to do.
Yeah.
And yeah, I think this movie is really an example of someone who has a mastery of subtlety, less is
Yes.
more, whatever you
Oh
want
my
to call
gosh.
it. This guy has it in spades.
Yeah.
It's not graphic per se. It's very
Right.
graphic on your mind.
Oh
It's not
yeah.
very graphic visually. And it's just incredible to me the deft hand that Lang and the cast use in delivering this very powerful story.
Yeah. So basically, what we've got here is one of the first speaking films. It's foreign to us because we are American, so it's a German film. It's an established director, an established lead actor, to be fair, too, and a subject matter that is controversial to say the least, right?
Right.
So if we were to do our introduction to the film before we know anything about it, let's say you read the back of the VHS box,
As I did
as the yeah, if this
twice.
still existed. I think that's what you'd get. Should we kind of get into the film and see?
Yeah, let's do it.
Let's do it. All right, so this is just a little section we call "What's It Saying." You're gonna probably hear us referring back to that question a lot because that's our goal. You're not going to hear us give 2 thumbs or a C minus or a whatever at the end of the episode. We are far more interested in like what was this thing communicating to a viewer, and was it successful in what it set out to do?
Yeah, yeah, I would agree. Because those are really the questions. What a movie gets on Rotten Tomatoes, critically or by users. I suppose that can be some kind of a helpful metric. Like what Justice League movie was that, Travis, that got like a 4% or something?
Oh my gosh. Yeah.
Okay, probably not going to be worth anybody's time, right? But then you have this kind of most movies critically are not 100% or in the 90s,
Right.
or get A's or thumbs up or whatever. They're somewhere in the middle. And so I think we are more interested in getting, not being so caught up in necessarily just the production value. Like, hey, this technology hasn't aged well, therefore this movie is just it's not worth seeing or something. Really interested in the marrow, if you will,
Yeah.
if that's not too pretentious sounding. What's really at the heart of the movie. And what does it say? What does it say? What do we think maybe the director or the cast was trying to say when they made this movie?
Yeah.
And what is it actually saying to the viewer? When you watch it, it's objectively saying something. So
Sure.
hopefully we can kind of answer those questions.
Yeah. So from moment one, right? I mean, from moment one, it's almost like it's so established so strongly, so quickly that like this is not this movie's not messing around, and I think we picked a
Yeah.
good first film for our purposes, and hopefully for the listeners' purposes, because the type of conversation we want to have is like, okay, what's really there? And with Fritz Lang's M, right, with this story, with this, lead character who's not in the film for that much, but is certainly the lead character, it's, geez, like that's a big bite to take off and chew. It's from the first shot. I mean, it's harrowing. That's the word that I keep
Yes.
coming back to. It's just absolutely harrowing to me that that a director who was coming off the heels of kind of a big blockbuster type movie would then go and say, like, basically the question he's asking that we'll get there, but in the end is ambiguously answered, to say the least, is what would bring someone to do something heinous like this, and how would
Right.
we as society be right or wrong to react and indict that person?
Yeah, and so just to be clear for any listeners out there who haven't seen this movie, the movie opens with children playing a game together in some kind of community housing of some sort. That's not a technical term, but it just mean houses close together. Anyway, that's not the point. The point is that one mother waits for her daughter to come home from school, and she doesn't, and it's very apparent quickly that the Kindermörder, as the Germans say, the child murderer, this guy that has struck and taken other little girls and murdered them, has probably done this again to little Elsie Beckman. And so it's not. I think to most people who aren't avid film people, it would be surprising to hear that a movie from 1931 would even try to touch that subject matter, and let alone try to touch it again with the harrowing and the sense of urgency that Fritz Lang does with this movie.
The treatment of the lead character is the thing that gets me the most, and we'll get there, in more detail. But it's not formulaic, and it's not simplistic at all.
No.
Like the conclusion you're going to land on at the end is not like, well, this guy's really bad and he got what he deserved. It is way more complicated than that.
Right.
Which is the most fascinating thing.
In this movie, I think to that point, it just mirrors real life as much as possible. Real life in Germany in the 30s was different than real life for you and I in the U.S. in 2020. But nevertheless, I think Fritz Lang is saying these problems, these are just people problems. These aren't just part of living in the 19th or 20th or 21st century. These are human problems that we will have to reckon with forever, as long as we live together. And I think, yeah, like you said, it's rather ambiguous at the end, but he does pose some really interesting clues, I think, as to what he thinks, if not a solution, then how society might better reckon with how to deal with these kind of atrocities.
Yeah, I think you're right. So the things I picked up in the first sequence, or let's say the first sequence, not exactly the first scene, because it's the the kids playing, it's the mom waiting, it's all that together. There's just that stairwell shot up the stairwell, down the stairwell is just like, it's totally, I'm going to use the word iconic probably more than one time, because this is the absolute touchstone of a movie visually in a lot of ways. But you've seen that stairwell shot replicated over and over and over. Like, I'm sure the Coen brothers have have lifted that. Tarantino has lifted that. Scorsese. This is like that. It's this feeling of like distance and not being sure, and emptiness and aloneness. It says so much in one shot. You talked about subtlety, I think, and like how Fritz Lang, I would say like he either is showing and not telling, or he's telling and not showing, and he never does both, which could kind of
that's a great way of saying it.
Yeah, like he's not gratuitous because he's only ever doing one thing at a time. But man, the ball and the balloon, right? Like that, those tell you everything you need to know. The ball and the balloon, right? The ball bounces away and lands in the grass, and the balloon is caught in the power lines. And I don't know. We're both parents, right? We both have daughters, plural. And I was immediately just, totally into the story, but also horrified,
right?
In the way that it's designed to give you.
And from a more, just a little technical side note on that, I think that's a good place to start about the sound design of the movie.
Yeah.
When you have that shot of the ball and the shot of the balloon, there's no sound, as I recall, there, except for her mother calling Elsie, and she's obviously not there in these locations where that's happening. And so I think that kind of goes along with the show not tell, or vice versa. It's it's just, you could make the argument, I think, that Fritz Lang didn't use sound 100% of the time when movies do now. It's just kind of a given because of the era in which he was doing. It's still kind of the Wild West, and movies with sound are still figuring out, and it costs money too, right? So I'm sure there's some kind of financial consideration there.
Right.
But I would be so bold as to suggest that every time that the sound is not running concurrently with what we're seeing is completely purposeful. I don't feel like this movie was at all limited by the time in which it was made as far as a production standpoint. I don't know if you feel similar about that.
I think you'd be hard pressed to argue that those are, we're figuring out speaking films, because everything else in the movie is so incredibly purposeful. It doesn't make sense to me. The thing about it is, right, is like the silence in a movie like this is not like the silence in a modern film, because when the sound drops out, there's no white noise of no speaking and just mics kind of running on a set. There's no minimal score and like this film is very, very sparsely scored. Like there's moments of score that come in and kind of do their job. But when you're talking about silence, it is like you are forced to look at the pictures and process them and reckon with them. And there's no sound to help you or hinder you. It's just you're stuck with the images. And you think about this guy's, he's a silent film director. This is his first speaking film. He's a master of images. He has to be, because he didn't, I'm sure, have a lot of say over the organ music and the dialogue cards that came up in the silent films of his past. This is now a creative decision to be silent. So I agree. I mean, I would definitely lean towards giving him credit for that and not just calling it some sort of happy accident or something. Yeah, I mean, we're going to say this, right, I think over and over, but like this thing feels so modern. The cinematography, I honestly was just gobsmacked at like, how does it look like this when they have essentially nothing, compared to like movies nowadays that look like trash, and they have, you could do better with a little bit of knowledge and some artistic talent on your iPhone, but it's remarkable. I think one thing that is worth noting from a storytelling perspective, not just technically, is everything is gross. You know what I'm saying? Like,
yes,
his depiction of Germany, but by extension humanity, right? Because this is his sort of little window into the world as a whole. It's icky, and there's a reference book that I'm going to use a bit. It's Roger Ebert, The Great Movies. We are both Ebert fans here. You'll probably hear us giving the props to the posthumous...
singing the praises.
Yes, Roger Ebert, the guy we always read and always admired, whether we agreed with his takeaways or not. Just thought his opinions were thoughtful and not reductive. And he makes the point in this book, which is just sort of like a little summary of a bunch of great movies. He says, certainly M is a portrait of a diseased society, one that seems even more decadent than the other portraits of Berlin in the 1930s. Its characters have no virtues and lack even attractive vices. In other stories of that time, we see nightclubs, champagne, sex, and perversion. When M visits a bar, it is to show close-ups of greasy sausages, spilled beer, rotten cheese, and stale cigar butts. And I caught this and wrote some version of it down, and then found this in Ebert's book and just thought, yeah, that's exactly it. That's what I was trying to say is he does not depict a Germany or a humanity that is at all romanticized or glamorous. And, we're talking about what he's saying, and I think the first thing is what you said. It's a human problem. It's a people problem. It's not like, oh, there's this beautiful society that's been infiltrated by a disgusting outsider. The disgusting is us,
Right. And he shows that, I think, over and over. We have the whole world, essentially, and by that I just mean the immediate vicinity of that area in Germany, or Berlin, that heaven and earth are moved to try to find Elsie Beckman. And what results is, kind of moral panic, and, people are just accusing each other on the street for looking the wrong way or interacting with a child in a way that they find suspicious in some way. People are arguing with each other at bars, like you mentioned. The government seems totally inept, more concerned about its image than about finding justice for this kid. And the cops seem incapable of doing it for many reasons, I think. Not necessarily for a lack of wanting to, but maybe for a lack of having a society that has a... Okay, so I'll jump ahead here, but I think that Fritz's kind of overarching point here is that reaction is no substitute for action.
Yeah.
And so you have these cops, and even the criminals come to play and to try to find this kid. But they're not even coming from there's, I think, a temptation for a viewer perhaps to go, oh, that's kind of cool that even the bad guys are looking for this guy because he's super bad.
Yeah, they gang up together to find the real bad guy. Yeah.
Right, but no, they're doing it because it's driving out their business.
Right.
So there's no, even though, in that very powerful climactic scene. I don't want to give too much away right now, but where they kind of accuse, they have like a kangaroo court essentially for the killer. It's this kind of, again, this moral outrage, but what is it based on? It's just based on hypocrisy and selfishness instead of a real concern for the dead and the departed and for the innocence of children. And that concludes that thought.
Yeah, I
Your
mean,
turn.
I have very, very similar notes. All I have here to that stuff specifically is it seems like it does acknowledge or purport the idea of sort of degrees of evil, because there's a line in there where the criminal dudes are rallying, figuring out like, what are we going to do about this? Cops raiding every place is bad for us.
Right.
There's a line where one of them says he's not even a real crook. So I mean, like, that's not a noble cause. That's
Right.
a prideful, self-expedient attitude,
Yes.
right? So I agree with you on those front, but like, it does force you to reckon with like some very hard and fast groups of people who are all kind of lumped together at the end, and I think that's important. Like, we have children, we have the rich, we have police, we have media, and then criminals and beggars, and they're all almost referred to by those exact names. I
Yes.
jotted those down as we went along, but you'll notice at the end when we get there, we don't want to give too much away because it's just, oh man, so much to talk about in that last scene. But those are some like very specific and distinct categories that he will go through the process of blending as pressure is put on them. You know what I'm saying? Like,
Yes.
the pressure of these continuing murders, it sort of turns all these people into the same kinds of people. I would argue that
Yeah.
the certain characters, certain police do kind of hold their own, make it to the end with some moral fortitude. But as a whole, certainly people are put in kind of the same petri dish by Fritz Lang, I think, in this thing. The big middle portion of the movie is largely procedural, which we can get into a little bit here. I know you wanted to speak to this, but this idea of like what would need to happen to catch a criminal like this in a modern story, right? Like, for 1931, a modern story says, well, they don't have, DNA records, and they don't have databases on computers and all that stuff. So you go through the 1931 version of that with fingerprints and witnesses and alibis and verbal accounts. So procedural. Talk to me about procedural.
I think it invented the genre, frankly, for film. I don't think a movie before it established the kind of the thriller, I guess you could call it, all the kind of genres that I'd want to throw this into, including procedural or thriller, psychological horror, even.
Right.
Yeah, I think it is all of those things, but it really, not just for the beauty of some of the shots that have been replicated over and over, but just the whole premise of a community being rocked by something very evil,
Right.
and then trying to figure out how do we stop this? How do we fix this problem without losing our own humanity in the process?
Yeah.
It's been done over and over and over, and I think it will continue to be. I don't say that as an indictment, but I think Fritz Lang kind of opened Pandora's box a little bit and said, this is going to be a story we can tell to each other over and over, because we're never gonna solve this problem completely.
Yeah, and I think he would argue, right, like, we must keep asking ourselves these questions.
Right.
We must.
Absolutely.
That's what the movie seems to say.
And as that procedure goes on, it is really interesting how that petri dish, as you mentioned, of people starts to subvert our own expectations, and I think the audience is led by Fritz Lang to make some conclusions about, as we mentioned, the criminals that are supposedly coming after the murderer are not really doing it for any good reasons either. However, they also enlist the help of the beggars,
Right.
who are just the absolute rejects, the lepers of society, to help. They essentially go to every corner of the city and just look for someone that might be the murderer.
Yeah.
And they end up being the ones that find him. And they, there's this blind man, right? The man, we talked about the balloon in the beginning. Blind beggar sells a balloon to the murderer as he is trying to what's the word I'm looking for?
I don't know, but I don't know why, I don't want to know what it is.
Well, it's just he's trying to convince her he's a good guy. You
Yeah.
know, like, hey, I'm safe. Come with. He's grooming her. That's what I'm trying to say.
There it is. Yeah.
To go with him and feel safe. So he buys her a balloon, and this blind beggar remembers that he hums Grieg's
Whistles. Yes.
whistles. Thank you, in the halls of the Mountain King.
Yes.
And which is, oh my goodness. Speaking of sound, what more? I never thought that could be a disturbing piece of music to hear. Yeah.
It's so haunting. Like
It's incredible.
It's a subversion, right? Like we hear the Tarantino needle drops of today, right?
Yeah.
Of like, Stuck in the Middle with You, Reservoir Dogs, and we think like,
Right.
oh my gosh, I can't ever think of that song the same way. Now, like, this has been done. This is 60
Right.
years ago. Fritz Lang said, I'm going to take this song that's reasonably popular and a classical piece and kind of cinematic, and make it simple and sparse and symbolic of
Sinister.
just evil, like pure
Yeah.
evil, essentially.
Yeah. And then, so to wrap up about the beggars, I just found
Yes.
it very interesting that this blind beggar, who's also in that ending scene when kind of procedure is coming to a close, and he testifies before the kangaroo court, and in my mind, he's the most, except for perhaps the bereaved mothers and families that are very briefly represented in the movie, and
Right.
I think on purpose. He is the most moral and upstanding character.
Mm-hmm.
And even though he's just from the very bottom of the barrel of society, he and his like kind of represent, in a weird way, this kind of primal goodness.
Yeah.
And this kind of selflessness that you
blind
don't find
justice,
at any
right?
other. Yeah, there
Isn't
you
that
go.
interesting? Because like the statue of Lady Justice or whatever, I'm sure I'm not saying that right.
Yeah,
but she
no,
has
that's correct.
She has a blindfold on, right?
Yeah.
And there's this idea that justice has to be blind to be true justice. So I'm sure Mr. Lang was not like, oh well, look at that. We made him a blind guy.
Yeah.
That was a nice coincidence.
Right.
Yeah, I think you're right, man. I think he forces you to look at police as incompetent and blind beggars as the moral center of this universe. And to reckon with that, you have to just you can't make assumptions, and you can't like the people in the story do. You can't just react. I love the kind of simple to exaggerated examples of that. There's a really modern kind of cutaway that happens when I think the police are talking about how, well, we're getting conflicting reports, and then he immediately cuts to this conversation about two different witnesses talking to, a police officer, detective, and they're both disagreeing on what color the hat was. What color the hat was.
Green, no red.
Yeah.
Green.
Exactly. That's really like that seems mundane and like a mistake anyone can make. But then you see that paranoia, escalate to
Yes.
a man with his daughter who he's being a little physical with, but for 1931, not necessarily over the top. And he's immediately sort of swarmed upon. We can't go too far into the movie without mentioning that Peter Lorre stars as the criminal mastermind here. I don't know if mastermind's the right word. I don't think it is, actually, now that I've said it.
The offender, the
yes,
killer.
in fact. The titular M. And I think I'm going to say, from my perspective, this is one of the best performances of this type that I've ever seen. I mean, the ones that I harken back to are like, Kevin Spacey in Seven, and Hannibal Lecter, Anthony Hopkins as Hannibal Lecter from Silence of the Lambs. Like, we have a certain idea of the monstrousness and the charisma of this kind of character in a screenplay, and he does it with very little. He's obviously done silent film, so he knows how to act non-verbally, but we see so little of him in the movie. Not just little dialogue, but he's only in the movie for 20 something minutes, 30 minutes, whatever. Like, he's not shown a lot. We do get one peek of him early on, right? One peek of him early on And I swear, like, you can probably speak to this more than me, but I see that shot of him staring in the mirror and pulling his face down, and
Yes.
that is the Joker. If ever,
Yes.
like, what else would the Joker be pulling from? I mean, Taxi Driver, the
Right.
king of comedy, but this image, that the commercial picture to sell that Joaquin Phoenix vehicle was him, pulling on his face to make a smile, and I'm like, wow, well, there it is. There's nothing new under the sun. But yeah, do you want to speak to like the sparseness with which he speaks and we see him, but the effectiveness of his portrayal?
Yeah, the movie doesn't make, unlike some other procedurals, it doesn't make a big deal out of making a mystery out of who it is.
Right.
It's very early on in the movie that, like that cutaway that you're talking about, it's like, here's the guy that did it, and there's no ambiguity left as to whether or not he's absolutely guilty of the crimes which society suspects him of.
Yeah.
But it's so not about. There's like a B plot almost of like, hey, how are we going to find this guy? But it's really so much more about as you get further and further into the movie, and especially that climax where you're talking about the ambiguity of whether or not he's accountable for his actions. It's a movie about what do you do with crazy people? What do you do with people who break society? What do you do with the jokers? And I think are you hearing sounds from my end?
I may
from
be.
my cave.
What's happening over there? Do you
Okay,
have somebody
I'm sorry. Yes,
who
it's
agrees with
just
you?
I'm in a cave, and there are many bats.
Many bats.
No, there's a new puppy in my house. So just another example of professionalism. I always like to keep animals that can make lots of noise nearby when I record. I find it adds a little mystery and fun, audio fun for the listener.
Introduce your puppy to the world. What is this?
Okay, this puppy's name is Alfred. He is a German Shepherd. He is 8 weeks old.
8 weeks old.
Yes, and well, frankly, I thought it would be fitting. I watched M and thought, well, now I should get a German dog. And
That's
so that's what I did.
Awesome.
Anyway,
I think you do make a really good point, and I don't know that I wrote that down, but it did land for me. They reveal it really early. It's not a point of, okay, so there's tons of tension in this movie. Let's not give anyone the idea that like this is not a tense film, because it is tense, but it's not tense because it's a whodunit. It's tense because it's a what do we do now, which is a way more compelling question. I think he forces you to look at now. We've mentioned the last scene a bunch. Let's touch on a couple other things. We don't need to dissect every scene, but
sure.
Let's talk about the office building sequence, because this is, I think, like kind of like a tour de force sequence in building tension and drawing out tension, because it's character based, right? Like he's literally locked in a cell with himself, wondering what to do, trying to break out. He is not a good criminal. Like, I mean, despite his success and his killing spree so far, he is a fumbling, sad, pathetic character. And the way that these guys who are militant and these criminals, and then later on police, they're absolutely like systematic and militant about tracking him down, and they have all the equipment and all the know-how. I just think that
they barely get him.
Yes.
They barely get him. So even like I said earlier, the Germany is moving heaven and earth to find this guy, and yet despite their best men and women on the job, they almost miss him.
Yeah.
Even though the whole world descends on this office building as the criminals are there, and then an alarm gets tripped by one of the night watchmen, and so the police come. They go door to door, and they almost miss him.
Absolutely.
But yes, to your point about tension, it absolutely is tense, because there is a part of you, I think, as a viewer with any kind of moral compass, where even though these are the criminals looking for him, and he may not be tried in a true court of law, you think, yes, please find this guy.
Yeah.
We don't want him to go back, just out the door and free to do whatever he wants.
And I don't know about you, but it forced me to. Obviously, I had that gut reaction of like, get him, as a father, as a member of society. But at the same time, the more that this mounts, right, and the more that you see what these people are capable of, like they go in and they just beat the crap out of these night watchmen and tie them up,
Right.
right,
And torture them
And-
if they don't tell them how many more night watchmen are in there.
Exactly. I am equal parts wanting justice and terrified for this guy. By the time,
Right.
and that's what Fritz Lang wants, right? By the time
Yes.
they get him down into that basement, courtroom scene,
Yeah.
that's what he wants. Now, a couple more notes on Laurie before we get there, because he is the absolute centerpiece of that
Yes.
last scene. But there's a lot of reflections, visually. There's a lot of him seeing himself in the reflection, and you just, I don't know. I have to say he brings so much pathos and dimension and nuance to like this guy who, again, in any other story or if you wrote it down on paper, absolutely he's done heinous things. Absolutely justice needs to be served, but he will not let you forget that this is a person, right? Like this
Yes.
is a man. This is not
Yes.
this is not a wolf or a bear or just a monster that's acting on instinct or something. Like this is a person with a conscience, and it makes you do two things, right? It makes you think, oh, what do we do? What do we do with this person that has done such atrocities? And he's gonna kind of answer it in Peter Lorre's monologue. But yeah, I can't say enough about how that performance just lands. Like every single thing Peter Lorre does, it's
And
so
I think
good.
to Laurie's credit, that is again just another reflection of reality. I don't know if you've seen the documentary Cartel Land that came out
Heard of it, not seen it yet. Yeah.
5 years ago. So not surprisingly, it's about Mexican cartels in the state, mostly of Michoacan in Mexico. And there's this really powerful scene. There's many powerful scenes in the movie, frankly, given the subject matter. But there's one in particular where this woman tells this story to the camera of how her either husband or boyfriend or significant other is just murdered in front of her by two specific members of the cartel, and they want her to watch. So you have this image in your brain like these guys are going to be. I mean, these are just monsters. These aren't people.
Yeah.
Which is rhetoric that we use in society.
Yeah.
That they did that, they're not a person anymore. We've removed them from the gene pool somehow based on their actions.
Yep.
And so later in the movie, the Mexican police find these guys, find the murderers, and they bring them out. And again, this is a documentary. This is not fabricated, unfortunately. And they bring these guys out of the house, and these murderers that have done this horrific thing are just kind of frumpy looking dudes, and they're just weeping.
Yeah.
They're not dressed up. They're in tattered clothes. They came out of a hovel, and they're just broken.
Yeah.
And so you feel that same. I think Laurie understands, unfortunately, better than probably we do ourselves sometimes, that yes, just like you said, these are still people.
Right.
And that's why it's so serious that we reckon with a real answer of what in the world do we do? And do you want to speak to kind of take us into that part about what you think Fritz wants us to do, or maybe just about Laurie's monologue at the end?
Yeah, we can get there now. I think I do have another Ebert touchstone here. He
need
writes about Peter Lorre's performance specifically. He says, Peter Lorre at the time was 26, plump, baby-faced, clean-shaven, and as he looks at his reflected image, he pulls down the corners of his mouth and tries to make hideous faces to see in himself the monster others see in him. That was, I mean, that's about that earlier sequence.
Nailed it.
But he, as the movie goes on, he keeps looking at himself in the window, in that classic, iconic snapshot of him finding the M after the little girl tells him, you have something on your jacket. And what we see is, as with lots of good thrillers and procedurals and just kind of crime films, as the tension and what came to mind was Gone Baby Gone, because it's a similar story but just a lot more modern storytelling. But when you turn up the pressure on a person or a group, what do they do when they're under this kind of pressure that is sort of unfathomable, right? And Fritz Lang's answer to that is the criminals, the citizens, they oh man, I I can't even tell you what my gut did. It dropped about 3 floors to the basement when they throw him down there, and then there's this shot of all the faces in the dark. You know what I mean? Like the camera just pans from left to right slowly, and you just see hundreds and hundreds of faces of all these people staring at this guy who they've been looking for and they want justice from. And I don't know. What would you say? Like, I don't see anything. I don't see just malice in their eyes. I don't see that they're ready to necessarily pounce on him and stone him. They're just frozen with what the heck do we do now? You know?
Right. I think it's the horror of it, coming face to face with it, and that kind of the delayed gratification almost, and finally, oh well, here is this guy. Crap, like you said, what do we do now? But also the sense that this is in some ways, I don't know about you. I've been in my fair share of courts of law. Not because I was being convicted of anything, but he is having this sense of accountability to the community that you don't necessarily even get in a court of law, at least not in that same way. In other words, you're not going to stare at hundreds of people in the basement of a distillery or wherever they are in the end there. And so to just have to come face to face with that, he knows exactly what they're thinking.
Right.
They're thinking, you monster, you sick man.
Mm-hmm.
What do we do with you? And he's thinking, don't judge me. I can't help it, as he goes on to essentially describe in his monologue.
Yeah, I can't. I mean, everybody who ever has any aspiration to act or direct or write anything has to see this movie first off, but has to see the monologue. I mean, the writing is so good, it feels so real, but the delivery, like, he gives you every ounce of the fact that he is 100% tortured by guilt. He is 100% wrestling with the idea of free will versus compulsion, right? Of like an evilness, like controlling him, and it's done so well that it disqualifies any single viewer. I believe from saying, well, here's what you do to solve the problem every time. Here's your one size fits all solution. Right. Like, here it is. Like, you can't look that guy in the face who has done these things and hear him with his explanation say, this doesn't justify the murder of a child. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying this is completely gray, in a way. This guy is gray, you know what I mean? In his own mind, he's trapped in a gray mind. He does not understand why he wants to do these things. He is absolutely compelled to do them. He knows they're wrong, and he still does them. So he's equally parts guilty and trapped. And I just think that I feel like what Fritz Lang wants, and you can give your own spin on this if you'd like, because he doesn't allow him to be, stoned to death or, taken over by mob rule and just murdered at the end of the scene there. I think he doesn't want to give me, the father of 2 daughters, 6 and 4, the gratification of scratching my caveman itch in that way, of saying, like,
he is not Tarantino in that way.
There it is. Because what is Tarantino's justice in this scene, right? He gets a bullet in the head, like, a few minutes.
Or many of them. Or a baseball bat. Or
Oh, there you go. Baseball bat. The bear Jew. This is the bear Jew, essentially.
Yeah.
What do you have to say about what? Because we're getting kind of down to the meat of it. What do you think his kind of ending thrust is here?
Yeah, I think to put it as succinctly as possible, it would be that it doesn't matter, because nothing is going to bring back those children, and so, all of that movement, all of this procedure, all these searches, the masses of people trying to find this guy, great, but what do people do once they've found him? And one day they will forget, because this isn't the army of mothers and fathers who have lost trying to find justice for their own children. This is the rest of society.
Yeah.
And so when they come to him and they think, we're going to get him, and he starts out, he comes down the stairs or rolls down the stairs or whatever, and he just comes off as very pathetic and very slimy and evil and, whatever. And so you're getting ready for that kind of Tarantino fix. Like, yes, we've got him. Let's kill him. And then I think, doesn't his monologue start with something like just this almost primal scream howl of "I can't help it"?
That's it.
In German. And it's just incredible because it immediately puts the brakes on, like, whoa, wait a minute. Because if this guy is going to be that honest and actually expose his soul,
Yeah.
which he does, that puts you in a way different space. And what's fascinating to me again is the arguments are the same as they are today. Some people in the kangaroo court, and the main criminal guy there, he says, well, what? We just gonna throw him to the insane asylum so he can get out or escape, or they can find him mentally fit someday and come back to society? That's a conversation people still have today when we talk about how to deal with insane people that have done criminal acts of any kind. And so I don't think Fritz is I don't think the point is, he's pro capital punishment or he's not, or these people can be rehabilitated. Just like you said, it's this gray area where, yes, we have to do something, but and then you have the movie's essentially over at that point. You just have a very brief a shot of a court of law, like they're going to be about to start charges or filing with his case, and you think, oh, okay, well, what's going to happen here? And the last shot of the movie is the mothers of the dead girls weeping in funeral attire in the back of the courtroom and saying essentially, none of this is going to bring our children back.
We have to keep a closer watch on the children. We have to. That's like
all of you.
Yeah, all of you.
And then the movie is over,
Oh
cut to black. Which is, talk about a tour de force. I mean, there is not a stronger note to go out on. And I think that really, to me at least, clearly indicates that Fritz is saying, look, we can go through the rigmarole. Yes, we have to do something with this guy. And frankly, in 1930s Germany, I'm not saying it because of Germany and Nazis or whatever, but just because the Western world in that era, I'm going to guess this guy gets the death penalty.
Sure.
I don't think that his case has a lot of jury appeal when it comes to insane asylum or whatever, but it's so not the point. I feel like Fritz is saying, look, if we don't do something about the fundamental issue of just keeping a closer watch, being accountable to each other, why can't we have these huge societies? This is what I feel like Fritz is saying. I'm not trying to rant like an old man here. I think he's saying we have these huge societies that are very complex, and we have people of all different classes, but we're so compartmentalized and we're so detached from each other that these wolves can sneak in and snatch our lambs. And if we don't fundamentally circle the wagons a little tighter, if we don't get to know our neighbor, if we don't say hello to the person crossing the street and get to know them, then we're not gonna. It's such a basic human problem. I feel like he's saying you don't have to reinvent the wheel. You don't have to necessarily go to a psychiatrist or to a theologian or to a doctor and say, what do we do with this evil person? You just hold your daughters closer.
Yeah.
And you have some accountability within your own immediate communities. And so even though that is not really given as a solution in the movie, I take that more as an inference.
Sure. Yeah, no, I think if you were to watch the whole movie and think that the systems that are currently in place are going to be the solution to this problem, he says over and over again, no, they're not. The police are incompetent. The media is exploitative. The criminals will jump on the bandwagon to sort of appear noble, but it's really just to further their own, like all of those groups that we mentioned earlier, those systems, essentially what the systems are made of, they're not going to fix the problem of an evil you can't fully explain, from a societal perspective. Yeah. I think to sum up, I think both of our takeaways, which I think are similar. Roger Ebert says in the ending of his segment on M, it doesn't ask for sympathy for the killer, Hans Beckert, but it asks for understanding. And that is it, man. I mean, that's it. So let's get into our final section here where we kind of put anything else in that we maybe missed and wrap it up. What do you think?
Let's go.
Yeah, man. So overall, I was freaking blown away by this movie. I love movies when they make me think and when they make me feel and when they look pretty and when the performances are good. And I have no. This is a perfect film. Like I
Agreed.
I don't know what we're gonna do from here on out, man, because this is the bar.
Yes, exactly.
It's the freaking bar. I did have. We've just had some. Reasonably heavy conversation, which the film prompted. But I do have some fun tidbits that I found that you might find interesting. So let me lay a couple of these on you and see what you think. Where are we here? Okay, so Fritz Lang is one of those nightmare directors that you hear about, who he is kind of a terror on set and with his actors. And I think you hear this about a lot of quote unquote genius directors. They sometimes don't treat their cast and crew with the greatest grace. A couple examples of that on this were Peter Lorre was denied a day off when he was completely exhausted, even though he wasn't needed for any scenes that day. They made him show up. Fritz Lang said, "You have to be here. We're shooting the movie today," and made him come anyways.
Wow,
kind of ridiculous.
Nice job. He learned his lesson.
Okay, and then the biggest example of Fritz Lang being Fritz Lang, allegedly, but this is in a book about Fritz Lang by a noted film historian. They sequence at the end where they drag Peter Lorre right down the steps and kind of throw him onto the ground in front of the crowd.
Yeah.
They threw him down the stairs. They shot that scene 12 times.
Oh, man.
And Fritz
Hope
Lang,
he was wearing some padding underneath that suit.
I'm sure he wasn't. And Fritz Lang kept doing it, not because it was wrong or they didn't get the shot. He wanted Peter Lorre to be desperate and exhausted by the time he got to the next part, which was the monologue sequence and the confrontation. So certainly some off the books methods used to get his performances.
Yeah, I would say so. But yeah, I guess that stuff is, I'm sure it still happens today, hopefully to a lesser extent. You never know. But isn't there a story like that from the 80s version of Stand By Me? I suppose that's probably the only film adaptation of that movie, where the kids are running on the train tracks and the train is coming for them. And they're just weeping and crying, because this train is about to run them over. And so supposedly Rob Reiner just berated the kids and cussed them out or something before the shot. Made these poor little kids just feel miserable, and then they wept, and he was like, "All right, start rolling now."
Yeah.
So
I heard a story.
It's a dirty trick, but I guess it's effective.
I heard a story about who is it? No, not William Peter Blatty. He wrote the novel. Who directed The Exorcist? I don't remember. William Friedkin. There it is. William Friedkin.
Oh, yeah.
The last sequence in The Exorcist when, he jumps out the window after taking on the demon or whatever. He jumps out the window and he, crumples on the ground and is dead or dying at that point. Another priest comes up and is performing the last rites. And William Friedkin told him, I want you to give these last rites as if you are, horrified, basically. And he gave a performance that everybody on set said was pretty good. And William Friedkin walked up to him after the first take. He because he's kneeling down on the ground. William Friedkin kneeled down and he said, "Do you trust me?" And he said, "Sure." And he slapped him on the face as hard as he could, walked around to the back of the camera and said, "Action." And so the cut you see in the movie is supposedly the one where he just decked him in the face, So these nightmare.
So that's what that red handprint is all about?
Yeah, exactly.
I hadn't really understood that before.
And he's like, whoa, when he's giving the last rites. That's it. It doesn't play well, if I'm honest. He's he's doing a little Looney Tunes bit there. Anyway, I think overall, fascinating story.
Yes.
One last thing. The push-in shot from the window, there's a tracking shot that goes through a window and then through a bar. I don't have any clue how they pulled that off then. That looks like Steadicam stuff from The Shining, from Spielberg films. I was watching that shot like, okay, the camera's getting closer to the window. When's it going to cut? It doesn't cut. It just goes. So technically, you can't really say too nice of a thing about this movie. We always like to ask ourselves this question: how often would I rewatch this? So for me, my review for this film is nothing short of glowing. I think the story is so worth, chewing on and absorbing. And Fritz Lang handles the material with such deftness. Like, he is so good at saying horrible things in a way that you can stomach, but you have to think about. I would probably rewatch this maybe once a year-ish, I would say, because it's heavy.
Yeah, that's the same. For the same reason, and I would do the same kind of iteration. It's a beautiful movie. It's I guess we could use all kind of superlatives and adjectives, but I mean, frankly, it's perfect. And it has something worth saying. Yeah. It's not just pretty to look at. It's hard to digest and swallow. But they are real issues that we kind of have to face as responsible people of the human race. But yeah, I wouldn't watch Schindler's List every week either. So, for the same reason, I once a year is about all I think I could do. And you got to be kind of in the right mood, I think, more contemplative. It's not a happy-go-lucky film, but I don't think that is any reason to avoid it. And if any listeners out there, hopefully this doesn't come across as preachy. I don't know what your take is on this, Travis, but I know some people are really turned off by subtitles. I would say this is a great movie to get introduced.
Yes.
If you have to read, but hey, we know you know how to do that. You're gonna miss out if you do. I think we talked about how there's a version that is dubbed in English, and you with any movie that is in a foreign language, to the native audience, you just miss out on so much when you don't get to catch that rhythm and the cadence of the language and the way that certain words are inflected. And this movie is a prime example, I think, of the very best that world cinema has to offer. So if you're an American or an Englishman or English-speaking person anywhere in the world and you've thought, no subtitles for me, we would encourage you to at least check out M.
Give it a
see
shot.
If that doesn't change your mind.
Yeah, well, I mean, best director, picture, and foreign film, creator Bong Joon-ho for Parasite last year, and one of the interviews post his many Oscar wins said, if Americans could just make peace with the letters at the bottom third of their screen, an entire world of cinema would be opened up to them. And I agree.
The truth.
I agree. I mean, there's lots of good subtitled movies. This is not a hard watch in the sense that, like, it's not hard to follow. It is very enthralling. I don't think the subtitles will turn you off to this movie. So I'm with you, Justin. Overall, man, we have had a great first conversation.
Yes, highly professional at every turn.
Technically perfect.
Essentially, this was the podcast version of M.
This was as perfect as M. So we hope you enjoyed the conversation. We hope you'll watch M. Next week, we have 42nd Street, a musical, a Busby Berkeley choreographed musical from 1933. We hope you join us. Justin, are you excited for that?
Super excited.
Excellent. And we have a special guest. We hope you'll join us, and we'll figure out what it's saying. Bye.
All right. Bye-bye.
Let the movie speak.
Hey, since you're still here and still listening, thank you, by the way, we'd like to ask an additional favor of you.
We have social media. It's a thing on the internet, and all you need to do is find us on Instagram or Twitter or Facebook and like and subscribe. I know this is annoying, but we have to ask you because we want more people to hear the show. In addition to that, if you could rate and review us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen, we would greatly appreciate it. See you next week. Bye.